Hi, it's Andy from PCR Global and welcome to this week's Walk and Talk video where I'm briefly covering Clause 8, Operation of the high level structure of the ISO standards. If you're new to the videos, then you're very welcome, and I hope that it sparks interest for you in any areas of risk management you may or may not have considered before, or even maybe an area you feel you'd like to revisit and go that little bit deeper into. Well, you've probably noticed that I'm not doing any walking, and in fact I'm sat in my office at home. Unfortunately, like many households, we are suffering and self-isolating due to COVID-19, but as I really wanted to continue, Andrew Collins has come up with a different approach which may even be a little more helpful for your method of learning. So without further ado, let's fight forward and get on with the task at hand. So you can see the standards we're looking at: 1878 security, 45,001 safety, 14,001 environmental, and 9,001 which is quality management. Going through the high level structure, as we've said, here we go: CLP SOPI, context, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation and continuing improvement. It's the same high level structure for 9, for 14, for 45 and for 18788. However, this is a really big clause which is represented differently in some of the different standards here. So for 18788, it's a really big clause. For 9001, it's a really big clause. For 14 and 45, it's a little bit smaller. So 9,000, we're saying it's a big clause. So let's have a look at the full clause for 9,000 against the full clause for 14,001. So 9,001, operation planning and control, 8.1, 8.1, and if we flick across to 45,000, 8.1 is the same, and if we flick across to 18 to 8.1, so this is operational planning and control. Really important. This is the business end. This is how we design, how we develop what we're going to do, how we control all of those processes, all of those activities, all of those development of products. This is a big clause. So we jump it back to 9001. Operation plan and control, requirements for products and services, customer communication. Very important. Communication is mentioned elsewhere within the standard, as we've already covered, but it's identified specifically in 9001 in this area. Design and development of products and services. A lot of people think if they've got a security company or a health and safety consultancy that you don't actually have a product, so you don't need to do any design or developing. It's really, really important that you are designing the internal processes of your management system. So you could be designing, looking at the framework of the standard, you could be designing how you do your audits. You could be designing how you deliver your consultancy. You're going to be designing how you implement your security services. You could be operating in Iraq, you could be operating in the maritime sector, or you could be operating, just delivering consultancy services. There's still going to be a design element to it, so it's really important. So we'll have a little bit deeper into the design element. For 14,001, as I say, it's our planning and then it's emergency preparedness and response, which we will cover. And this is the same for, similar I should say, for 45,001. Our planning, then we've got eliminating hazards, reducing risks, management of change. Let's concentrate a little bit on 1878 because I really think this is a fantastic standard. So if we get down to the actual clause 8 within this standard and take a little look deeper, we're on 6, we're on 7, and we're coming up to 8 now. If we look a little bit deeper at this clause, so operational planning and control, we're talking about implementing processes to meet the requirements and to implement the actions determined. Criteria, it mentions criteria here, so we're going to be, the criteria is like the context, it's how are you actually doing it. We're really digging in here in accordance with the criteria. What criteria are we setting? If we jump across to 45,001 again, the criteria is going to come up again. So it's very specific to the actual context of the organisation and specific to the standard, of course. But we're looking at that criteria. The organisation should plan, implement, control, and maintain the processes needed to meet the requirements of the system. It's the same across all of them. What we need to do is to establish the criteria for the processes. When we think of criteria, if we look across to risk criteria, when we put together a risk assessment, if we just use the same templated risk assessment in all organisations, it won't work because the criteria, the context, external, internal is very, very different. That criteria itself could be down to the actual risk appetite of the organisation. It's going to change the criteria. It's going to change everything that impacts on the decisions that are going to be made for the management system. If we jump across to 9001 and we get into that criteria for 8, what do we have here? Operational planning. Again, we have planning implementing for the management system. We have determining the requirements, products and services, establishing the criteria. Very specific. We'll jump down to 14,001. It's going to be the same, establishing the operating criteria. So it really does go back to the context of the organisation, which is the first clause that we actually looked at. Let's go a little bit further at other interesting elements we've got in 9001. Requirements for products and services. We talked about that communication that's needed. We also have, this is an interesting one, the review of the requirements. Now, the organisation should ensure it has the ability to meet the requirements of products and services to be offered to customers. The organisation will conduct a review before committing to supplying the products and services. And what we're going to consider within that review. Well, we're actually going to consider any statutory and regulatory requirements, any contract or order requirements differing from those previously. So again, we are delving into the specifics of that. Other areas that are interesting is the design and development, like we said earlier. Design and development planning. Failing to plan, planning to fail. If we're not going to get together and do that, risk management, which it is. It's risk management because we're looking for opportunities, we're looking for improvements, we're together. And this is where risk management comes into all the other activities that we're doing. We're trying to embed risk management. By doing design, we're doing risk management. You can't do one realistically without the other. Design and development planning. In determining the stages and the controls for design and development, the organisation will consider nature, duration, what else is interesting here, the need for involvement of customers. So again, that's listening to the stakeholders. A big part of ISO 31000 is that communication. If we're going to embed risk management, we're not just embedding it into the organisation, we need to bring in our stakeholders as well, back to communication for that one. Design and development inputs, statutory and regulatory requirements. If you're a health and safety consultancy, standards or codes of practice. If you're a security company, across in 18788, that's going to be items like the Montreal document. Operational planning and control, 14,001. A life cycle perspective, so cradle to grave. This is what we're thinking, this is what we're taking into consideration. The organisation shall maintain documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that the process has been carried out as planned. This is the same as 45,001. Once we've established our criteria, once we understand the inputs, the regulatory requirements, then that's going to determine the approved codes of practice, like we said just now. That's going to determine whether our safe systems of work are going to be documented to the nth degree. That's going to determine whether we need to do permit to work systems. That's a higher level of a safe system of work to implement more control. 8.2, emergency preparedness and response. For me, this really is critical. Emergency preparedness and response, emergency plans, design and development of emergency preparedness and response. And it's going to be in here that we periodically testing the planned responses. We are documented that we've tested them. that is going to be the same across the board. If we look across the 45001, we're going to be having the planning. The interesting element in 45001, 812, eliminating the hazards and reducing the risk. So we're looking at the hierarchy of control, easy AP. So we've got eliminate substitute engineering controls, administrative controls, adequate personal protective equipment. That is just one hierarchy of control. There are a plethora of hierarchy of controls. They're written in certain legislation within UK law as well. An interesting point to note here, in many countries, legal requirements and other requirements include the requirement that personnel protective equipment is provided at no cost to workers. Now we could very quickly go past that statement. Let's have a little deeper look. No cost to workers. So who are workers? Are workers employees? Some interesting developments, I think it was this month, but certainly it's in the HR magazine that we get, on the provision of PPE. It's been challenged. So apparently the EU directives that got put in 1992 with regards to PPE were not fully implemented, and we'll cover that in another area. But workers, where does it state who workers are? It states in so many different types of legislation. But if we're looking at, we've got the gig economy, if we're looking at people like some contractors are going to be considered as workers. Don't take it for granted. This legislation that wrong, this sort of legal, it's not even a definition. This legal determination has only just come out. So it's a good area to focus on, workers. Management of change, MOC procedure, very important in certain higher risk elements of health and safety sort of delivery. So it's important. Procurement, always an interesting one. 8.14, procurement. We need to be thinking about before we even purchase items that we've considered them in a health and safety context. You often have a procurement department who are buying things. They could be buying things like defibrillators. They could be buying things like PPE, yet that has not gone through the health and safety specialists. So it's really important to think of that. There we go, the emergency preparedness and response, and it's going to be exactly the same. We don't have the right to say or the right to think that our emergency plans are going to stand up if we don't test them. Operational and planning, 1878. Let's have a quick look through this one, because there's so much in here. Respect for human rights. Very, very much impetus placed on human rights. Norms and behaviour, codes of ethical conduct. We're talking about this requirement for this standard is you're going to be developing a code of ethics, a documented code of ethics. That has to be implemented also by any members of your supply chain who are delivering your service on your behalf. The use of force is going to be in here, quite big in the security context, of course. Weapons authorization, use of force continuum. You often hear me say about a sliding scale in anything to do with management, really. This really is important in the rules for the use of force and use of force continuum when you're going up the levels and down the levels as well. De-escalation, escalation, and de-escalation. What else have we got that's important in here? We've got less lethal force. Again, not your average things you're seeing in the standard, but if you're involved in security and you're actively looking for the standard, this is what you've got to be doing. Use of force training, search we've got as well. And we've also got road responsibilities, personnel. The organisation shall retain sufficient personnel, employees, contractors or subcontractors to carry out its contractual obligations. We often see this where people say yes, they'll have the contract, they don't actually have the resources to cover it. Just checking the time. And back across to 9001, control of externally provided processes, products and services. It's very similar to what we've just been talking about. If it's in your supply chain, it has to conform as well, and you have to identify the type and extent of control that you're putting over those subcontractors or those people in your supply chain. Are you going to be doing second-party audits? Not enough second-party audits are undertaken. Product, anything else before we finalise? Post-delivery activities. Very important to come to the end of the contract. In a health and safety context, this could be the health and safety file that you're leaving behind, which has the information on how to utilise or service whatever it is that you've actually handed over. If we think of Prince 2, we have the benefits review plan. We come to the end of the project life cycle, and then we review the project for lessons learned. Big clause in 9001, control of non-conformity outputs. We've got our NCRs, and that is coming up to the end of that one there. So, as we can see, clause 8 is a big clause. We're still going here in 1878, selection, background screening and vetting of subcontractors. You hear me talking about this quite regular. Your biggest risk is usually your subcontractors. You need to be screening them, not just the once either, we need to be screening them regularly. And there's also a requirement in here whereby the persons who are part of the management system that are working for you, they have to bring to your attention if they recognise that they're going to fail or there's a potential conflict with the selection and with the screening process that you've set in place. Again, procurement, it's the same for weapons, uniforms and markings, standing out, occupational health and safety. Look at this tiny little piece that's in here, but we know even procurement really does come across the health and safety law. Incident management, again, that's health and safety law. Occupational health and safety, providing hostile environment training, guidelines to identify and address workplace violence, misconduct, alcohol and drug abuse, sexual harassment. This is it's an excellent standard. 1878 is an absolute excellent standard. It really is. Incident monitoring, internal, external complaints and grievance procedures. So if we flick grievance procedures, really does the Employment Rights Act. Employment Rights Act, let's have a quick look. It's worth knowing a couple of clauses, it's actually the legislation. It's worth knowing a couple of areas within the Employment Rights Act. I want protected disclosures. So here we're talking about whistleblowing, the meaning of protected disclosures. And also if we fire up, I don't think it's about 103, I could be wrong, 103, 104 maybe. 103 alpha protected disclosure. So this is all about unfair dismissal and whistleblowing. Really is worth having an understanding of whistleblowing in terms of just a general management of the organisation, but certainly it's written in 1878, it's in there, isn't it? So that's it. That's us covering clause 8, operation, a very big clause, lots to take in, and I hope you enjoyed it.
As you can see, Clause 8, Operation, is a large clause, especially for ISO 9001 Quality and ISO 18788 Management Systems for Private Security Operations. For me, and I hope as these videos are highlighting, following the requirements of the ISO standards really does give a handrail when guidance is needed. With that said, if you're a company considering implementing one or more of the standards, I highly recommend purchasing a copy and becoming familiar with the requirements before you put your hand in your pocket and part with your hard-earned cash and pay the services of a consultancy. On the other hand, if you're a risk management practitioner, like a health and safety, security, environmental or quality manager, or even a consultant for that matter, add in the high-level structure, the HLS, to your mental grab bag really does provide comprehensive framework that you can work from. So I really hope you found the content of this video beneficial for your personal risk management journeys, especially as we've tried a new method of getting multiple levels of information across to you. If you did or didn't, I would be genuinely interested in knowing why, or as the case may be, why not. If you did find it useful, then please let me know by hitting the thumbs up button and also by subscribing to the channel. If you also hit the bell icon, YouTube will let you know when we have uploaded another video. The only thing left to say is stay safe, stay healthy, stay productive, and as always, don't trust it, test it. Just as I did for COVID, I suppose, and now I know we've got it. Although banging headaches, frequent toilet stops and general lethargy was a bit of a giveaway. Thanks for watching. See you next time.